Mr. Jaitley, appreciate you joining us on the Network 18 universe. Let me start by asking you, sir, you laid out the difficulties that the economy is faced with. You laid out how you find that your hands are tied. Is this the best that you could have done? If I were to ask you to rate your own budget, we've had everybody else rating it, but do you believe that this is the best you could have done?
Exercise because I have to run an institution and a system. The others only have to participate in a television program. There's a difference between the two. I'll tell you, I was faced with a situation where the economy wasn't looking the very best. People were losing confidence in the Indian economy. They were not willing to invest in India. Indian investors were flying out of India and looking at other options. Your tax system was being condemned. Your infrastructure was at a standstill. And your manufacturing growth was in the negative. Your growth rates were low. Your tax revenues weren't buoyant enough. And I had 45 days to bring the budget. Therefore, in 45 days, I had to prioritize my priorities. This is not the end of my journey. This is the beginning. And therefore, when I start this journey, I must be clear about the 7, 8 big things that I want to do. A lot of it was clearing up the mess left by the earlier government. There were decisions they were not taking. Some of those decisions were relatively simpler decisions. There were matters which they had complicated. So I had to untie the knots in those matters. And therefore, I have spent the last 45 days. I had only 2 advantages over them. The first was a major advantage, that my party has a majority in Lok Sabha on its own. The second, internationally the investors were giving us a second chance. They've started looking back at India, and therefore we have to respond. Therefore, I had to lay down an initial roadmap which is directional. Now, other steps will follow in that direction. And then I had to come out with some answers, but the direction of each one of those answers has to be that we want to grow. We are creating a conducive environment to grow. We are not only opening our doors, there is enough scope for doing business, and we are easing that scope. That's a message I wanted to give to everyone. At the same time, I have a large section of Indian people below poverty line, weaker sections. You have to be concerned about that. I have to be concerned about the burden on the average taxpayer. And therefore, I had various issues to address. And within this time available of 45 days, some of those issues I have addressed. The others I will certainly take care of in the months and years to come.
I understand that this is only the first step that you're taking towards the process of economic repair and then revival. But let me ask you about what seems to be the disappointment as far as this budget is concerned. Let me quote to you what Fitch Ratings Agency and Moody's is saying. Fitch says, we're unsure how the fiscal deficit target can be achieved without further revenue strengthening or expenditure saving measures. Moody's says we're not sure how they will be able to achieve this fiscal deficit target. Tax buoyancy at this point in time is not guaranteed given the state of the recovery. You have in the past questioned the UPA's fiscal deficit number and the credibility of that number. Do you believe that you are going to be able to achieve the fiscal consolidation roadmap that you've set out? You're sticking to 4.1%. On your own admission, you've said it's a daunting challenge, 3.6 and then 3%.
Please measure each one of my words. I had an option to get into a slanging match with the earlier government, start questioning the credibility of India's economic data. The budget document has a sanctity. And I start questioning everything that the previous government has done, create panic in the market, and therefore allow the markets to tumble over and people lose faith in the very accounting of the Indian system. I didn't want to choose that course. The issue is not a conflict between me and the previous government. I have no problem with them today. We won the election, they've lost. We'll now face them after 5 years. Today I am concerned with a situation where I have to meet the challenges which confront me. Therefore, my challenge is not that I must talk my opponent down. So I didn't go on that course. On the contrary, I said, these are the steps I am taking to revive growth. These are some of the steps. They are only directional. My predecessor has laid down a a fiscal deficit figure for this year of 4.1%. I find it daunting. It's very challenging. But one fails only when one stops trying. And therefore, I have accepted that figure as a challenge. I will raise resources. There are only two ways I can tackle that fiscal deficit. I can cut down expenditure, as the UPA government did, or I can generate more resources. I can up the revenues, generate more non-revenue resources. My preferred course is the second course.
Sure.
And therefore, I am going to, in the first instance, rely on the second course. I therefore take steps for manufacturing, I stabilize taxation decisions, I stabilize certain decisions with regard to infrastructure, I start looking at cities, I start looking at real estate, and I start looking at all these areas. And therefore, what the rating agencies have said, how will you achieve this roadmap? Well, if I go back to 5.6 to 5.9%, in the very first year, which is a challenging year, and thereafter I move further upwards. That's my preferred course. Now, it's easy to talk down any course, but those who are apprehensive must find faults with the roadmap that I have assumed to myself. The roadmap is obviously challenging. The previous government had created roadblocks for itself. So my first task was to remove the roadblocks. It's only then that I'll allow the traffic or the monetary traffic to flow on those roads. So I have followed a particular roadmap.
Right.
I am quite willing to say that I tried my best and I have achieved so much. And that's my direction. So I'll achieve something more in the next year. But I have no other course except the one which I have embarked upon.
Absolutely. As you pointed out, that your preferred route is economic expansion as opposed to squeezing out expenditure even further. Are you betting on the non-tax revenue cushion, the disinvestment proceeds?
Of course I am.
In a big way. You've budgeted 43,425 crore rupees from disinvestment, another 15,000 from PSU stake sales, and another 27,815 from PSU dividends. Do you believe that you can significantly better this number, and that's giving you the cushion?
I'll be candid with you. If you see my speech, I deliberately didn't have paragraph after paragraph on disinvestment. I didn't want my friends from the left or some other group to just walk into the well and disrupt the speech. But in my budget documents, I have candidly mentioned it. And I have not adopted a course for the present which is different from the UPA. They decided a certain set of PSUs, and with the market at 25,000, 26,000 Sensex, this is the ideal time to disinvest. I looked at those, I'm looking at those PSUs, and in accordance with the decision of the previous government, I'll move ahead on that course. And I think in the present state, it is possible to realize certain revenues from them. And that is why it's not only PSU disinvestment, the bank capitalization, of course that money doesn't come to me, it goes to the bank itself. So while they retain their public sector character, they are going to use this enormous resource over the next 3 to 4 years. I have laid down 2018 as a deadline for them, for greater financial inclusion. The banks will roll out more branches, give more money to people, generate more economic activity, and instead of governments holding 80%, well, if this 80 became 60, the bank will still be the same with greater autonomy, but the bank will have much more money for its own economic activities and greater inclusion.
I know you cannot go below 51%, and that is the stated objective and the position as far as this government is concerned. But the big idea as far as bank recapitalization was concerned of the setting up of this holding company, is that something that you could maybe look at down the line, or do you believe that is off the table for now?
No, nothing is off the table. I am looking at everything, but I'm not in a position to comment. I've spent 45 days in this office, and these 45 days I've been busy listening to people, interacting with them, and coming out with these proposals. Obviously, as I said, this is the beginning, and therefore all these ideas we'll look at, and this is going to be directional as far as those ideas are concerned.
So what is the threshold that you believe you can see public sector banks move towards? 51% is sacrosanct, it cannot be below that. What is the level that you would be comfortable with?
Well, some of them, you see, it could be 51 for some, it could be 60, 55. That's a decision which the banks will take. Of course, the Department of Financial Services will be in consultation with them. But I want over the next 3-4 years, a lot of money from common citizens to be invested in these banks. And I have, if you see, I have phrased it in a manner It's today the people of India who own these shares through the government. They will hold a small section of it directly themselves. The character remains the same, so my critics don't have much of a ground to challenge me on. But at the same time, I have brought in savings of people into the banking system, and banks have a lot of money to expand themselves. I think in the banking sector, it's a very important reform.
One more question on banks before I move on to another issue. As far as new bank licenses are concerned, has there been any conversation with the Reserve Bank of India on when we could see the next round of licenses being given out? And what is your position in terms of corporate houses being given bank licenses?
Well, I'm still to look at this matter in detail, because I've spent my last 1.5 months on working on these proposals. But after I discuss it with the Reserve Bank and within the ministry, only I'm going to make a statement.
Okay. Let me now ask you about expenditure control. And as I pointed out, the disappointment is that perhaps there isn't enough that's actually happened on the expenditure management side. You, of course, prefer the route of economic expansion. But on the expenditure management, you have decided to set up an expenditure management commission. What can we expect?
Well, can I tell you something?
Sure.
I have no authority to rate the rating agencies.
If you were to.
I'll only tell them to be a little more realistic. 67 years, India has not been able to find an answer to subsidies. So they expected me to find it in 45 days. What I have said is that as far as subsidies are concerned, I will have an expenditure management commission, which will look into various expenditures, including subsidies. It will look at subsidy rationalization. And therefore, a part of our subsidy problem, oil is already market-related. Diesel, hopefully, in a few months will become market-related.
LPG and kerosene?
Well, there are issues. Kerosene, particularly, you have to find an answer, because kerosene is used by the most deserving and the least deserving at the same time. So how do you dissect the two? Do you go in for some kind of a system to weed out the undeserving? The Prime Minister himself last week took a meeting which lasted a couple of hours, looking at various options, including an amending form of Aadhaar for a DBT. We've just taken over, so the rating agencies should also appreciate that these are areas in which we will require some more time to move.
But what would be the ideal cap as far as subsidies are concerned? Currently, about 2% of GDP, vote on account 1.9% of GDP.
I am not going
to
tie myself into figures itself. Don't forget, there are two aspects of subsidies. There is a very large section of India which still depends on these subsidies. All subsidies are not undeserving. Subsidies in general can become unquantified. They can relate to an unidentifiable section of people. But there are some people who need those subsidies. Don't forget, India still has 30% people below the poverty line, around that figure. And therefore, it's the responsibility of the state really to make sure that trickle down alone won't pull them, or pull up alone won't pull them out. You have to have your poverty alleviation schemes, etc., which will include schemes for subsidizing them. How do we rationalize them is the real challenge before the government.
But do you believe that the subsidy number, the expenditure on subsidies, could look very different once the recommendations of this commission come in, which you hope will happen this financial year? Significantly lower?
I do believe that, and I think that should happen. That's good for, and the monies that the government saves are monies which the government will spend on something, again, for the development of the economy. That money can go into infrastructure, that money can go in for faster poverty eradication, that money can go in for repayment of debt. You can have 100 options. Today, we are starved as far as our defense investment is concerned. We can look at all those areas.
Just a follow-up question on that. As far as the Food Security Act is concerned, there has been a deferral of rollout for another 3 months at least. So our assumption, and this is what the Secretary has also confirmed, is that the budgeted number could perhaps even, you could have some savings on that front.
But realistic, you could have, because the states have not got the list of eligible people. And therefore, everybody, it may not reach out to everybody. Unless those eligible lists are there.
But you've also spoken about reviewing in consultation with state governments the Food Security Act. Could we see a very different Food Security Act post this process?
Well, I think there is a little challenge which exists in a democratic system. It's a responsibility of a government to take the country on a particular track. And therefore, once one mainstream party, when in power, goes on a particular track, reversal of those decisions is far more complicated. If you were writing on a fresh slate, maybe you could have written otherwise. But once you are undoing what somebody has done, the complications are far more. So therefore, I don't want to boast of my ability to change everything. You'll have the same position with the Land Acquisition Act.
So you don't believe that we could see significant changes to the Land Acquisition Act
I'm not
either?
saying that. I'm not saying that. In fact, at the meeting of the ministers, the state finance ministers which I had, and the revenue ministers which Mr. Gadkari has, cutting across party line, everybody has expressed a problem with the act.
Sure.
And therefore, whether it's a left or a Congress or a third front government, everybody in the states is saying, what do I do? Where do I get the land from? You require land for infrastructure, you require land for affordable housing, you require land for townships.
So is amending the Land Acquisition Act going to be a priority for you?
Well, you will have various options. If you ask me, is an overall haul possible? It's far more challenging. No. Can some more exemptions be added? Always remember, reforms are an art of the possible. Reforms are not the art of confrontation.
Well, speaking of undoing problems that you had to inherit, and the big hope was, the big expectation was that you would repeal the retrospective tax law. The decision to hold back on that, while you very clearly articulated your intent to provide a stable tax regime, to provide a stable policy regime, the decision not to repeal the law, is it because of the kind of political confrontation that you expect on account of that, or the fear that you would be seen as selling out to the foreign investor lobby?
No, I don't think that issue arises. I would like to believe that in the outgoing government, the leaders of the government, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, may have been uncomfortable with this law. But they didn't have political space to move further. We did have the political space. And therefore, when I looked at this taxation administration issue, the Prime Minister himself has spent hours on this issue in discussing it with me. Just appreciate in totality, in a short span of 45 days, what we've done. Does the Parliament have the power to enact retrospectively?
It does.
Of course it does. Will this government also enact laws retrospectively, creating fresh liabilities? The operative word is fresh liabilities.
Sure.
In all likelihood, we are not going to do that. I'm fairly categorical about it. Are we going to issue fresh notices on the basis of the 2012 Act? Doesn't look like. And if some opportunity arises because time has passed by, we'll get the CBDT to look into rather than allow the assessing officers to get into this exercise. What do I do? That remains the only problem with litigations which are pending. Do I repeal everything and nullify those litigations and create a new situation? Or do I allow litigations to run their course? I allow the amendment to proceed prospectively, and whatever the litigations decide, whether it's arbitration or it's a court verdict, so be it. Now, these are also possible ways of resolving a dispute. A litigation is a very civilized way of resolving a dispute. And therefore, we've been clear about all the four eventualities.
So what is
now, I haven't stopped with that. I've gone a step further. In a short period of 1.5 months, we set up an advanced ruling authority for domestic investment above a threshold. I then go into details of all these litigations pending with regard to transfer pricing and lay down specific guidelines, amend the law so that we bring those litigations to an end, so that no uncertainty in India remains. Now, this is a huge step forward as far as tax administration in this country is concerned. Now, the only path which remains undecided is what do you do with past litigations? Let the litigations provide the answer.
How confident are you that we are going to see a conclusion of the Vodafone conciliation process soon?
Well, I have personally not been commenting on that case, and you know the reasons for it.
You've decided to recuse yourself from that.
And therefore I'd rather not comment on it.
Okay, let me move on and ask you about the goods and services tax, because that could easily add at least another percentage to the GDP. You have talked about how the debate must end as far as the GST is concerned, and you've also broadly given a timeline of being able to conclude the consultation process within the year. Do you feel confident that 1st April 2015 is the GST timeline?
I have had 2 meetings with the state finance ministers, and the impression that I get is they are almost reconciled, provided we pay them the CST compensation. Like the retrospective tax, This is another problem I have inherited. Since 2010, the states have not been paid. Now, you didn't keep the promises. I don't have money to pay now. So I have to now generate more money over the next few months in order to first pay the states, and after I have paid the states, to find an answer to the problem. Now, in the Empowered Committee, there is a broad consensus. I am willing to go with that consensus. It may not be the utmost that I want. It may not be ideal, but it's reasonably good. I can make that a starting point. Then there are two other states which have raised certain other issues. So I am confident of overcoming it because both are NDA states. And one of them is Gujarat. And therefore, for me to resolve issues with them is quite reasonably plausible.
So April 1, 2015, you believe we will see a GST rollout?
Well, I'm going to make an effort, and it's a top priority item for me.
On the direct taxes code, because that you said is also up for review, the current bill or the previous bill has lapsed. The economic survey laid out a roadmap as far as the DTC is concerned. Would you go with that, or would you like to see significant changes from the current avatar?
I have looked at the DTC extensively when I was in opposition. I have to take a fresh look now. Last 45 days, I have not had the time. And therefore, once I look into it, I meet the stakeholders, I'll take a view. I'm not rigid about anything. It's like I'm willing to make a fresh beginning. If there are good points in the DTC, so be it.
So DTC, by when do you expect this review process to conclude?
No, it's yet to start. It's yet to start. And therefore, once it starts, it's only then that I'll be able to comment.
Okay, let me ask you as far as FDI is concerned, because you have decided to hike the FDI cap both in insurance as well as defense. You have the political strength and the political capital to have been much bolder on both these fronts. The decision to hold back, not political courage, lack of political courage, or do you want to take a calibrated approach?
No, I think we've taken an approach which suits India. Just hiking it indefinitely may not suit us for the moment. And I have taken an approach which I am able to convince the Indian decision makers to accept. Today, the Vajpayee government made it 26% in defense, we made it 49%. The Congress government, we go on indefinitely buying from foreign players, but we won't set up a majority company in India. They had a debate and a debate, the defense minister opposed it, and finally they couldn't do anything about it. So 49% I've come out with Indian control. It's a calculated decision, and I think the Indian political system will find it easier to accept that decision.
There could be no review on account of transfer of technology with CCS approval on a case-by-case basis?
I think when it comes up now for formalizing the guidelines in the cabinet, these are issues which we will take it up, but the policy stands announced.
On multi-brand retail, you haven't rescinded the policy just yet. Is that going to be something that you take forward? I believe the legal opinion at this point in time says that it's not that easy to rescind. So will you leave the multi-brand policy as is, not accept invitations from foreign players?
We'll decide. I can only tell you on this issue, it's a lesson for all of us, including for the previous government. On a the two lessons are, in the first instance, when you reform, and that's why I've said art of the possible, go in for areas where you can achieve something. If you go in for a traffic jam on day one, if you take that road, you'll never move further. The UPA had 10 options on FDI. They chose the most complicated and got stalled somewhere on the way. Secondly, if you bulldoze on the strength of parliamentary majority, you can take a decision, you can never implement it. And in multi-brand retail, it's the center, it's the states, it's the municipalities. They all step in. And somebody is in power somewhere or the other. And therefore, for the UPA government to take that decision and then say, well, I am throwing my hands up, people have invested in this country and are now going back, kind of a situation, I'd rather have waited for a proper consensus before such a decision comes.
But now that it is a policy, what is your personal opinion on what to do with it?
Well, I don't think India is prepared for this policy to work at the moment.
But you're not planning to rescind it just
Well, we'll
yet?
take, that's a formal decision. We'll take it, whether we take it or not, that's a separate matter. But I think from multi-brand retail, decision makers must learn a lesson.
Okay, I want to ask you one specific question as far as the mutual fund industry is concerned, and the feedback coming in from the market is that on account of raising of the long-term capital gains from 10 to 20%, you've actually dealt a pretty severe blow to the mutual fund industry. Is there any scope or possibility to review this decision?
There doesn't look like. Because the data available with the CBDT shows that as far as the mutual fund industry was concerned, the tax relief was given to small investors. This was being used by major corporate players to hedge their investments and make money out of that. That was not the intent. And a large amount of tax sacrifice was going on, which was not intended to be given to large corporates. And therefore, we decided to hike it.
So no review of this decision?
Doesn't look like.
Mr. Jaitley, you said that this is just the beginning of your journey as far as the reform agenda is concerned. What more can we expect? Directionally, you've laid out the roadmap for economic revival. What more should we expect from you over the next 6 to 8 months?
Neither the Prime Minister nor I am dogmatic about these issues. The direction is clear, and once you move in that direction, I think...
what are you most worried about at this point in time? A failing monsoon, global uncertainty, the worries in Iraq. What are you most concerned about?
Well, I'm concerned about each one of these. You see, if these two adversities, Iraq and monsoon, these clouds go off and there is a certain certainty of a more peaceful environment and a better monsoon this year, then I think we'll be able to move ahead on the road that we've...
if the drought situation worsens, and there is an expectation of a drought in large parts of the country, especially in western India, would you be faced with the tough dilemma, the tough decision of perhaps another debt waiver for the agriculture sector?
Well,
do you believe that you have the stomach for that?
I don't want to make these sensational statements. We'll wait for that to cross that bridge if it comes. I hope it doesn't come.
Well, we hope it doesn't come as well. I know we're running out of time. Let me ask you my final question. When you took office, you said that you're going to be in the Defence Ministry only for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if my memory serves me correctly. It's been much more than that, sir. What is the road ahead as far as the Defence Ministry is concerned?
It's a good question.
Will you continue to hold both offices?
Well, it's a good question, but the Prime Minister alone knows the answer. I don't.
Mr. Jaitley, thanks very much for speaking to us on Cnbc TV 18 and the entire Network 18 family. It's been a pleasure speaking to you as you delivered your maiden budget.